Hello there, guys. For the third time today, and hopefully the last, I'm going to attempt this return stream from I say hiatus. You know what it's like. I stream for a bit, I go away, I come back again. It's not as if we've missed much over the summer. It's been pretty quiet, really. Well, apart from Biden dropping out of the race, and speaking of race, the race riots, that was a thing as well. And I suppose the Kursk offensive in Russia by Ukraine, that's been pretty significant. But none of that really got me passionate or inspired to come talk to you. Like Keir Starmer banning smoking outside of pubs. Disgraceful. This is what happens. We vote in this giant majority, and there we are. The boot is firmly on our throats. Frank says the first item should probably be the race riots. Yes, I suppose in order of significance and importance there, because that happened during the entire duration that I was away. Christ. Well, I'll tell you one thing. It's just as well that Starmer getting in. One of the first things they did was announce that the prisons were overbooked and they were going to have to release a bunch of people early because God knows the amount of people that they arrested in the wake of the riots. They were going to need the space to be freed up, weren't they? Yeah. It was a real hell of a time, wasn't it? In the wake of the stabbings, which were, you don't even have the words, absolutely awful. There was so much stuff online, so much conspiracy or ideas behind who's the person who's done it, what's their background, where have they come from. Uh, I don't necessarily want to characterize everyone within the riots. Oh, okay. Liberty Prime's getting on this point for me. I don't know if I'm being dense here, but race riots, weren't they protesting because of some murdered children? Um, there were different components to this. Okay. I use the phrase race riots specifically because it was a nice little segue in from talking about the race in America, but there were different components to this. I think you had, for starters, you had people who were just outraged at what had happened, people who had seen what had happened and were shocked and appalled and wanted to express uh, some kind of solidarity or grieving or mourning for what had gone on. You'd have people going out and assembling as a result of that. Also, you had information going around online about who is the person behind this attack. I think you had, well, I know you had sort of misinformation that specifically, oh, it's a migrant who's come in on a dinghy or something like that, and then obviously that was being stirred up online. So then you had, I'd say, far right, hard right, extreme right, however you want to put it, different elements of that coming out and stirring the pot. But then I think also you just had people going out, basically having an opportunity to go out and riot. If you think back, when was it? It was over 10 years ago now, wasn't it? But the riots that we had in the early 2010s, again, spawned by a particular incident, but then beyond whatever that incident may be, you then get a bunch of people just saying, hey, you know what? It sounds like there's going to be a load of rioting going on in the town or city nearby. I think I'll go and loot some stuff. You know, there'll be that many people doing it. There's no chance I'll get caught. I might as well just go. Fuck it. I'll set fire to some shit and steal some stuff because I can get away with it. That might have been the perception there as well. So there were. I think there was an organized element of sorts by far right type people, for example, people who are deliberately targeting, I don't know, refugee centers or mosques or things along those kinds of lines. But then, like I say, you also had people who just wanted to come out and cause a bit of mayhem as well. Let me take a few of these comments because there's a lot here. Liberty Prime says, I always find things are named based on if the current government approves or not. The Black Lives Matter riots were the same as these, but were called the Summer of Love as opposed to the race riots. Well, what I can say to you, Liberty Prime, is I wouldn't refer to any form of rioting as a summer of love. I don't know who coined that in particular, but I certainly wouldn't identify with it. As always, these are both movements that develop automatically orchestrated, co-opted disorder. Liberty also adds, if anything, Black Lives Matter were more violent. Off the top of my head, I don't know if that's the case or not, but I'll say this very plainly. Um, I don't approve of people going out and rioting and setting fire to shit and stealing shit and causing damage and all of the rest of that stuff. It doesn't matter whether you've got motivations from the left of politics or the right of politics, whether you think you're on the right side of history or what have you. You don't do it. It's the same old. You know, it's basic shit. Uh, don't go and tear down the fucking city that you live in. Don't threaten and intimidate politicians and throw things at them and threats of physical violence and all the rest of it. Don't shout fire in a crowded theatre. But yeah, I think that the Labour government's response to it, in the sense of, you know, really very quickly sort of saying, right, okay, we're going to do our absolute best to get all these people taking part in it prosecuted. I think that was pretty on the ball of them. I think they did fairly well in response to that. This is the thing, you can't justify, no, you can't justify what went on there, regardless of whatever motivation people have, or they go, oh, okay, well, we're just, so say if you're some of the people going out and rioting and saying, oh, well, we're doing this to send a message because, you know, we think that the stabbing that took place is absolutely appalling, but then you kind of latch a bigger package of views and motives onto it and go, and therefore we're just going to go out and, you know, have a general sort of, we don't want immigration, we don't want the Muslims, we don't want the boats, we don't want, you know, we're going to go after some mosques, we're going to go after some asylum seeker centers, we're going to, um uh, you know, off the back of the idea going around online that, oh yeah, this is someone who came off of a boat in the channel who did this stabbing, which obviously didn't then end up being the case. But obviously, regardless of that, you know, you had people going on and uh, latching onto it and trying to just wreak what havoc they can with it. And you had the Farages near the very beginning of it, sort of going, "Oh, well, I think there's something that we're not being." Yeah, he was stirring the pot, wasn't he? He stirred the pot. I mean, you know, Nigel's relatively savvy. He's not going to often come out and say something in such a direct way that could get him in trouble and mean that he's got to be held directly accountable for things. But certainly in the very early stage of it, he was very much stirring the pot, going, "Oh, there's things that we're not being told. There's you know, stuff being covered up, blah blah blah," which really sort of fueled the flames of all this conspiracy. Again, I'm not saying that the people going out and rioting were doing it at Nigel Farage's behest or anything like that, but I think that some of the people who are going and doing it probably operate in similar political circles with similar kinds of views to the likes of Farage and Chums. I think that's a reasonable enough thing to say. Um, what is there more to say on the riots? Actually, I'm trying to think. Uh, I don't know. I've done the basics. I've condemned it. I've kind of explained. I've explained how I thought there were sort of different strands to what was going on there. But there we are. It seems that we have this about. Would you say it's about once a decade or so? We sort of bubble over into some big old riots, something like that. Um, Biden dropping out though. It needed to happen. It needed to happen, and obviously, I'm pleased that it happened because I made a stream after his performance in that debate with Trump, basically saying they need to drop him off the ticket or Trump's going to win. And I think that, you know, that was the received wisdom of near enough everyone who saw that. And I think it took a little while for all the Democrats to come round to that point of view, at least the senior Democrats, to obviously do whatever needed to be done in order to pressure him to stand down, that kind of thing. But ultimately, he did it. Better late than never. Kamala Harris taken over. Now, I didn't have an awful lot of stock in Kamala Harris, and I'm not necessarily sure if I do at this point either. But there seems to have been more support for her emerging after Biden stood down than I'd anticipated there would be. Now, how much of this is to do with Kamala Harris herself, and how much of it is to do with, oh, look, it's a person who's not Donald Trump, but also isn't Joe Biden. Let's get behind her. But it seems like in the polls in America, before where Trump was leading, now it seems that Kamala Harris is leading pretty convincingly. So I wouldn't want to go as far as saying that the election's a foregone conclusion. I feel like that's not necessarily a very wise thing to say, not least because it very much matters on a handful of swing states, what happens in those individual contests. But I think that if a few months ago we were looking at near enough a dead cert that Trump was going to win, I'd say that it's now a pretty competitive race favouring Kamala Harris. That's where I'd put us here at the moment. I want to read a couple more comments here from the previous topic. Lee Ball says, I would add that many of those charged have received very harsh sentences, which they must have excellent grounds to appeal, especially if minimally violent and they pleaded guilty. Frank says, I don't remember the movement from anti-war protests regarding the bombing of Iraq in 2000s, but I'm sure they didn't progress to riots. Outside of that, I don't think of anything that came close that decade. At the very least, on what you're saying on the Iraq war protests, I believe you're correct there. Of course, my memory stretching back that far is slightly flawed because I was quite young at the time. But certainly when I think about that, I mean, for example, that big march protest that they had in London before the Iraq War with, Stop the War Coalition and all of that. You're right. I don't remember that. That didn't transmute into violent riots. Now, whether or not there weren't pockets of violence in response to the war at times, I can't say for sure that there wasn't, but I don't remember there being, if that makes enough sense. Lee Ball says there were some attacks against police kettling and some opportunistic window breaking and the like, but nothing on this scale. Liberty Prime says, yeah, saw one guy got 20 months in prison for waving an England flag at police officers. Another got 18 months for chanting. So crazy. Again, I don't know about these individual cases that you're talking about here. When you say, I mean, on the face of it, you're saying 20 months in prison for waving an England flag at police officers, and obviously 20 disproportionate, stupid. How on earth could you do something like that? I wonder though whether or not there was perhaps even in the cases that you're naming here, whether there was slight additional context to it. Is it that it was people that were already there in the setting of a violent riot going on at the time that had come out to cause trouble? I don't know. I certainly know that a lot of the sentences probably are deserved, no doubt. But if some people have possibly been sentenced for slightly harshly, but for lesser things, I could see that happening as well, because obviously you've got to come down on this all pretty hard, pretty quickly. But yes, on the face of it, if you're telling me 18 months for chanting, I mean, I suppose it depends what they were chanting. Perhaps ever so slightly. How many racial slurs were in those chants? But no, I see the point that you're making there. I think that certainly, things such as physical damage, violence, etc. That's the stuff that needs to take precedent there. Frank says maximizing Rust Belt states are key for Harris. There's a likely scenario where Trump wins the presidency, with even just Pennsylvania losing Wisconsin and Michigan. Liberty says people get locked up for posting lyrics with the N-word on Twitter or for making their dog offend people. To be fair, I'm not surprised. Well, not quite, Liberty, not quite. Here's the thing. I agree with the overall thrust of where you're coming from, okay? Because we've got a similar point of view in this, all right? I don't like the idea of, especially when it comes to what I'd call pretty minor stuff like supposed Twitter censorship, or someone says a bad word online that people aren't happy with. Someone makes a joke that that a lot of people disagree with. Oh, they've got to be criminally punished. I'm absolutely opposed to that 100%. But in the framing of the way that you've put it there, I wouldn't say it's entirely accurate. For example, when you say people getting locked up for making their dog offend people, I'm assuming you're talking about Count Dankula, and I don't think he was ever locked up, was he? I think he received a fine in Scotland for it, which again I don't agree with. I don't think he should have received a fine for it, but he wasn't being locked up for what he did, was he? So I think we can make the points that we want to make on this kind of stuff, but we don't need to step outside the we don't need hyperbole to make these points for us. I think it's reasonable enough to just say, hey, look, I don't think these things should be happening the way that they are. Liberty Prime says they were chanting, "Who the fuck is Allah?" Right. Okay, I see. So they were out there doing sort of, I guess you could call it, racially stroke religiously aggravated chanting then while they were there. Again, it's a difficult one. It's like, do I think someone deserves a year and a half in prison for saying who the fuck is Allah? No. Despite the fact that that's not a thing that I would condone saying, because I think in the context, for one thing, it's like, okay, you're going out there with a bunch of people to fucking protest and descend into riot, and you're deliberately targeting segments of the population and fucking saying disparaging things about their god that they devoutly believe in. Um, you know, clearly you're going there to cause trouble. Clearly you're not, I think, being an honest, good faith actor here going, let's have a public discourse about about this. No, that's not what's going on there. But nonetheless, I don't know. I don't know whether or not I agree. If 18 months is the right or wrong thing for that, because again, I don't know the wider context of it. I don't know whether it was purely for chanting or whether there was other actions going on in there as well. But I think by and large they've come down hard and heavy on this because it was, the state of what was going on. It sort of bubbled over so quickly, and there were so many of these little pop-up events going on, and definitely a far right presence in a number of these, especially with the specific places that they were targeting. Um, I think it was motivated from a pretty nefarious place. So I think that the response to that probably does need to be quite harsh. But I'm not. I'm not sure if I could agree with every individual thing that I hear and go, "Oh yes, this person was arrested for that. That person arrested for that." I mean, Liberty, it's obviously provoking behavior which has rightful consequences. Swiss says, have you visited the potteries? Me and my team are turning it into a huge betting shop. Liebel says, Kamala is a terrible candidate. See her own 2020 run for evidence. Scripted word salads. Aplenty. From what I've heard, because I've heard more about Kamala since all of this. And I don't claim to be any kind of an expert on this. I've really only pieced together my proper understanding of Kamala Harris in the past month or so. But I think she's one of these people that's allegedly a lot better and seems smarter behind the scenes than her ability to do oratory, if that makes sense. That she's not a very good speaker. But nonetheless, I'm very much happy to fall back on my position I said earlier of just, she's not Donald Trump and not Joe Biden. Therefore, you're on to a winner. Because there's a very big chunk of the American public that do not want Trump again. But likewise, a lot of those people who didn't want Trump also really didn't want to have to vote for a very aged president whose faculties are clearly beginning to fail him. Not to mention all the people who do want Trump obviously don't want Biden either. So it seems like Kamala Harris was, she comes along and suddenly, oh, thank goodness, there's a different person that we can vote for. Liberty Prime says, literally just for chanting. Couldn't find further offences. That's basically having your liberty removed for words. Scared to tell my mother-in-law what I think about her at this point. What I'll say, Liberty, is in response to your initial comment, as I say, if you said it was 18 months for going and chanting that, yeah, I think that 18 months instinctively feels a bit harsh to me. But again, I don't even think this is. I don't know. Say if people were chanting some offensive things at a football match or something, you'd be like, "Fucking 18 months for that?" You know, no way. But I think contextually, this is people going out to cause trouble, to intimidate particular segments of the population. Uh, maybe the individual who was doing the chanting wasn't causing criminal damage, but by God, they were there with the people who were and moving in the same circles of that. I don't, I'm not saying guilt by association is fair, but I think that for a lot of people, for a lot of different events that went on during that week or so in a lot of different locations, people that were turning out there were turning out to cause a lot of trouble. Not just, oh, I want to go exercise my freedom of speech to say what's on my mind. It's I want to go show a bunch of people that we don't like them. They're not welcome here. We don't want them in our country and all the rest of it. And like I say, there's a much more nefarious edge to that, I think. But again, yeah, I think 18 months purely for chanting, yes, that is too much. But nonetheless, I think that what once it became clear what was going on out there after the first day or two, if you're going out there and you're going to go join one of those protests or riots, it's okay. There's a fair chance you're doing it either because you don't like foreigners or Muslims, or because you want to go rob some shit. I don't think that I don't think that there were that many, what me, Gov? No, I'm just doing on it. I mean, this is the thing that I say that there obviously were people who just wanted to go out and say, oh, I'm opposed to this. I want to, there's a big, in response to what's happened, there's a big movement going on where lots of different elements on the right are saying, uh, anti-immigration, anti-boat crossings, anti-asylum seekers, all that kind of thing, even if it wasn't rightly directly connected to the stabbings that spawned it all in the first place. But if that snowballs, then yeah, you can get, I suppose, individuals who go, oh, well, this is what's happening. This is the moment in time to voice our views and say we're against this, or what have you. We want to change how many people are coming to the country, or the way that they're coming to the country, or what have you. Um, and if you want to go out and voice that and say, that's the point that you're trying to get across, that's your right to do so. But again, then I suppose the way that you're going about that is, who the fuck is Allah? Is that really the most nuanced argument you can make when it comes to trying to say we want to change the levels of immigration in the country? Fuck your God, you know. But anyway, I'm going round in circles on this. But I think the best way for me to put it is that I like I like freedom of speech. I don't like racists, and it's a difficult line to draw when you've got sort of you know people exercising their freedom of speech, saying things you don't agree with. Fair enough. I'm willing to accept that, absolutely. But when it's in that context of a bunch of people going out to cause intimidation and stir up hatred, and in cases of some of them, not all of them, causing large amounts of violence as well, then it's a different matter, isn't it? Um, let me read this. Liebel says, like I said before, all pleading guilty, so should be treated leniently for not wasting the court's time. Swiss, your quote, more serious guilty just because they were knowing what it was, sounding argument is not a strong one and a cause for some of the angst about all of this. My more serious guilty because they were there knowing what it was. Right. I see. I see where you're coming from there, and I sort of caught myself as I was saying this. I thought, oh yeah, it does sound like I'm going down a guilt by association kind of route. But I come back to saying that I think that a person going and chanting something like that still shouldn't get 18 months for it. I think that that's harsh. I think that it's disproportionate. But what I'm trying to say is, What am I trying to say? Fuck, I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's a messy thing, you know. There's some people out there who were acting within what I think the bounds of free speech should entail. There were other people who were clearly going there to cause a lot of fucking trouble and criminal damage. And in the absolute mess of trying to police that kind of thing, you're probably going to get, you are going to get people falling on other sides of the lines who are maybe punished or brought in for things that were maybe slightly more minor. But again, the wider situation is there was a big fucking out of control bunch of riots going on, and shit had to be done to shut it down. You know. So there we are. There we are. Maybe the best thing for me to say is sometimes, look, I can't come here and say, right, you know, I've really thought it through, and I've come up with the perfect rule of thumb and dividing lines to decide everything that's appropriate and not appropriate and how things should be punished or anything. No, it's looking at it and just kind of going, yeah, it is a messy situation. This is what my instincts are on it, I suppose. This is my gut reaction to the things that I've seen and heard. Grave Peril says, Judge Keller added, violent protests can't be tolerated, and neither can violence towards police officers who do their duty to protect the public from disorder, and those who can expect to receive severe sentences to punish you and deter others from disorder. I'll leave that one there as we are anyway. So where was I? I think we touched on the, oh Christ, yeah. And I was talking about Kamala Harris and Trump and all the rest of it. I don't think I've even mentioned Trump's attempted assassination. That sort of went by, didn't it? While we were away in our hiatus. I think at least. I can't remember exactly, but yeah. Same rule of thumb. I don't like Donald Trump. I think he's a massive threat to American democracy. He's shown that much already. Not being willing to accept that you lose an election is a real big no-no when it comes to a peaceful transition of power. But yeah, you know, don't assassinate him. I don't think we should be advocating assassinating any politicians, really. Defeat them with your words and your arguments and your votes at the ballot box. There was a bit of controversy, I think, in the wake of that. If any of you know the band Tenacious D, Jack Black's venture with bandmate Kyle Gass, they were doing a performance in Australia, and it's Kyle Gass's birthday, and they brought out Jack Black brought out a cake for him and said, "Make a wish, blow out the candles." And Kyle Gass said, "Don't miss Trump next time." And then after that, like the day after that or something, Jack Black cancelled all the rest of their tour, put everything on Tenacious D on hiatus, and sort of said, "Oh, you know, I absolutely can't stand by that kind of comment." And all the rest of it, you know, because of how politically charged everything is. And this is the thing. Here, getting into another little tricky debate about, you know, the use of language, the threats of political violence, and all the rest of it. In that context, should anyone be stirring, you know, stirring up more trouble that someone's attempted to assassinate a former president and a presidential candidate? No, you know, you need cooler heads prevailing. You don't need to turn the temperature up. You're not supposed to be endorsing that kind of stuff, obviously. That said, I think it was fairly clear it was a joke. You know, I think that saying, don't, you know, making a happy birthday wish for the bullet not to miss Trump next time, it's a joke, you know. But it wasn't a very wise joke, I don't think. At least not with the platform that you were on and the number of people listening to you and all the rest of it. Regular people, average Joes, me and, well, I say me and you. I think my position as broadcasting on the YouTube channel is slightly different, but you know, the average person, yeah, they will make jokes about that kind of shit. You know, they'll go, I wish the bullet had hit Trump, being because they hate Donald Trump and all the many reasons there. But I think push coming to shove, you know, people with their rational heads on, most of them are going to say no. We should not be actually trying to assassinate our political opponents, no matter how awful we think they are. Liebel says it may have been a joke, given it's a joke band. Yeah, they are a comedy rock duo after all. Um, Lee Ball adds, for those who actually committed physical violence against officers, I agree with the judge. Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I think there's a scale of severity there, but I won't go back over that. I feel as if I spent a long time kind of stumbling over trying to reach some kind of a solid positional conclusion on all of that. But like I say, I struggle because it feels thorny. I've got my principles on what I feel is right and wrong, but I think it's possible to be very much opposed to the things that you see that are going on. Um, and then at the same time, also, I suppose in individual cases, think, yeah, that's a little bit harsh. But then also understanding in a wide context that in response to stuff like that, you kind of need to be a little bit harsh because that's what stamps it out from continuing to happen in that situation. It's an imperfect thing. Uh, but anyway, on to the main bread and butter of today. I joke, it's not all going to be about the smoking ban. But I did want to talk about sort of the period of time since the election and Labour coming to power and just what it's been like so far. Because I think the first, especially the first week or so afterwards, I was pretty impressed. I was actually really impressed. Um, they really hit the ground running. I feel that the election happened, and then for about a week and a half after that, um, it was announcement after announcement. We're going to be doing this. We're going to be scrapping that. We're going to be bringing in this. It all felt like they were really putting their foot on the pedal there. And I was impressed with. Obviously, Labour had sort of planned it for a while. I think when you're planning from opposition an election campaign and a project for government, you've probably also got blocked in, a grid, perhaps as we'd call it, of what we're going to do in our first week in power and our first month in power and all the rest of it. And I think the first that first week or so was very well choreographed with all the announcements, and I think they did very well. I think the overall overtures that start. By the way, I'm starting off with the stuff I think they've done well before I get into all the shit. Just so you don't think I'm coming out suddenly standing for Keir Starmer's Labour now. But starting off with the stuff that I think was good. Yeah, I think it was a well done first week or two. Lots of announcements, lots of laying the groundwork for implementing parts of their manifesto. I think the King's speech had more legislation in it than I think any King's speech in about 20 years or so, which sort of shows how quick they are to be wanting to get things done, and it sort of put the Tories to shame a little bit. Speaking of putting the Tories to shame, mixed feelings on this one. Okay, I had a real I really enjoyed that feeling of catharsis in the period of time after Labour had won, where they were going, oh, look at this mess that the Tories have left us, look at the state of the public services and the public finances and all of these problems that we've got to fix and all these fires we've got to put out. Of course we're going to have to do unpopular things to fix it because they've been ruining the country for the last 14 years. And that sort of feeling of, haha, the shoe's on the other foot. You spent ages telling everyone about how Labour crashed the economy in 2008, and you spent ages using that as justification for everything you did. Well, now it's our turn. Now you're the ones in opposition, and we can blame all the ills of the country on you. And I think quite a few of them fairly well deserved. So, I really enjoyed that for a bit. And then it started to get a little bit too repetitive. It started to get a little bit like, okay, look, I know how bad things are in the country. I know that the Tories have been the ones in charge for a long old time, and they carry the can for a hell of a lot of that stuff. And it's going to be absolutely right and absolutely justified for going forwards for years, in fact, to speak frankly and honestly about, look, this is what we inherited. These are the things we're going to have to do. These are the people responsible for what was going on, all the rest of it. But that said, I feel like the message is being oversaturated. I feel like I don't think that me, as a person who never in my life has or will vote Tory, who does blame the Tories for a lot of the ills of the country, I don't think that only a month and a half into this Labour government, I should be getting sick of hearing them blaming the Tories for things already. So I think perhaps they're laying it on a little bit thick, a little bit much at the moment. Um, but I think as well, when they first got in and they announced what was going on with the prisons, and the state of how many prison spaces there were, and the fact that they were going to release some people early, from what I gathered from it, that was a can that was well and truly being kicked for a good year or longer beforehand. That this situation was ongoing, but the Tories, obviously not wanting to seem soft on crime, I suppose, didn't want to release a bunch of people early. But then again, the question is, well, what do you do about the lack of prison places? You can't just pop up a bunch of new prisons overnight. Um, so Labour coming in and sort of using their honeymoon phase, pretty much off the bat to say, look, this is the situation with the prisons. This is what's been left to us. The Tories have really dropped the ball with it. We're going to have to release some people early because there's just not the places for them. But obviously, I think prioritizing, violent offenders, sexual offenders, all the rest of it as the people who still need to stay locked up, but then the lesser crimes being released early. Maybe that ties us back into the riot prosecutions a little bit, doesn't it? I suppose you shouldn't be releasing anyone from prison for a crime more severe than what some people are being arrested and put away for in the spaces that you're freeing up. I suppose that's a relatively good rule of thumb there, isn't it? So and then I think obviously you had Starmer's been off to Germany to go see Olaf Scholz, going, and I think he's been to France recently to meet Macron for the Paralympic Games and all the rest of it. Invited Zelensky to cabinet. Always a popular move, getting old Zelensky around. So yeah, the initial period of Labour winning, I thought they did very well off the bat, hit the ground running, so to speak. I think that stalled when the riots took place, because that kind of coasting, good feeling vibes of, oh look, we've got to change the government, kind of starts to falter a little bit when you've got a bunch of different parts of different cities being set on fire. But I think they did a fair job at handling that. I don't have a particular amount of criticism coming in for the government off the back of trying to clamp down on the riots. But since then, I think that there's a few things that have started to niggle me a little bit already. With Labour coming in, one of them, like I'd already said, just how much they're banging on about the Tories. I love a good bit of Tory bashing as much as the next person, but if I'm getting sick of hearing it, then maybe they shouldn't be saying it as much as they are. In the wake of what went on with Ukraine and Kursk, that was one that I didn't talk about. I have to get into that one. I'd really love to, hear that Zelensky has permission to use our Shadow Storm missiles and all the rest of the kit that we're giving them to strike into Russia. I understand that the reason that's not being overtly said, yes, you can do it, is because of fears of escalation and all the rest of it. But in a way, I think that Zelensky's already sort of escalated himself at this point. He sort of said, all right, well, you know what? Think things aren't going so well on the front in Ukraine. Let's open up a new arena here. Let's try and change things up. And I feel that it was a masterstroke doing it, because no one saw it coming. I didn't see it coming. It's as if ever since the war in Ukraine, really blew up in a couple of years ago, it wasn't even on my radar in a way. It wasn't even feasible to me, the idea that, oh yeah, well, Ukraine could invade Russia. It just wasn't on the cards. I didn't see it within the bounds of what we were looking at in that theatre of war. So it totally blindsided me. And obviously it blindsided a hell of a lot of other people, the commentariat, Putin, all the rest of it. So just having a good news story for a little while, just having something that you can say, look, we're being proactive here. Yes, we're not succeeding in repelling Russia in the east. In fact, if anything, we are still losing ground there. But all of a sudden, if we go and snatch a little bit of Russia, that gives us well, for one thing, it's more proactive. For another, it brings the war home to the Russians. It puts them in a arguably better negotiating position should any negotiations ever arise, because it's a lot easier to say, hey, get out of our country, if you can offer to get out of their country in return. But yeah, I'm obviously wanting to see Ukraine prevail ultimately. So I would like to see full permission to be given to them to use any weapons that we give them in any context that they see fit. I think obviously, caveats being don't bomb nuclear power plants, don't deliberately target only civilian areas, etc. Well, I suppose that comes from the definition of war crimes, doesn't it? Yeah, don't do any deliberate war crimes with it. But if it's the argument of, look, take the fight to the Russians, start attacking them in their own territory, then yeah, I think we should throw our full weight behind them on that. So I've been wanting to see more from Starmer on that one. But yeah, it's the smoking outside the pubs that's niggled me, and I'm sure this comes as no surprise to any of you because I am. Well, I suppose I'm more of a vapor these days. I'm a very occasional smoker, but I've largely quit smoking and I just vape instead. But I do like my nicotine. Um, the ban smoking indoors that came in about 2007, can't argue with that. To be honest with you, I think it's fair enough. You don't want to be stuck in an enclosed space with people who are smoking because of the detrimental health effects of secondhand smoke. It's not fair for people working in a venue. If you're working inside a pub, to be stuck inside a room or a building for hours and hours on end, breathing in other people's smoke. It's their choice if they want to smoke cigarettes. They know what the health detriments are and what the risks are, but you shouldn't inflict that on other people. Fair enough. Fair enough. I've got no harkening back to say bring back smoking in pubs or anything like that. But I think as a move to then say, right, but now actually what we want to do is we want to ban people from smoking outside of pubs as well. You can't go out in the pub garden for a tab. You can't go outside the front of the pub for a tab. You can't, supposedly going outside for the cigarette. That was the sort of the willing compromise that the smoking population did when these laws were brought in. I mean, obviously, in a way, because it's illegal. You'll get in trouble if you don't go outside to smoke once the law was changed. But the point was, it's not as if you saw mass protest of all these people lighting up fags indoors, and it becomes some sort of a moment and a movement to say no, we draw the line here and no further. People abided by it because I think it was reasonable enough. But I don't like this measure. I don't like. I feel it's too much of an infringement on people's freedoms. And again, I don't like to invoke. I don't like the idea of the slippery slope because obviously it's a fallacy to say just because A has happened, therefore B will happen, therefore C will happen down the line. However, I feel that what what was brought in 2007 was a reasonable measure that most people could get behind, and in retrospect, I'm perfectly fine with it, even as a person who's affected by it in terms of my freedoms being limited. But I'm not going to be feeling that way about I want to go sit on a wooden table 30-40 feet away from a pub in a garden and smoke in a big outdoor area. I think that. I mean, is the argument supposed to be but even though it's outdoors, so obviously it's much more well aerated than a small confined space. Any amount of secondhand smoke, that could potentially waft over to someone is harmful, no matter how small it is. Therefore, the best thing to do is to ban it, even in that situation. I think, but it I suppose this is where it comes into whether or not it's a slippery slope, because I think that if that is the reasoning you're using for it at that point in time, if you then say, okay, well, even the smallest traces in the air that a person could breathe in is detrimental to them, therefore it's justified to uh, ban it in pub gardens or whatever. What is it then so great a leap to say, okay, and we'll ban it in parks? If you're out in a park and you're sitting on a park bench and smoking, what if someone walks past you and breathes in the smoke air? Is it fair for them to breathe it in and the health effects, blah blah blah? I feel that if that's the main crux of the argument being used for banning outside of pubs, then I feel that same line of reasoning could be then applied to future situations. I suppose That's my concern with it. But the point being, I don't agree with this as it is at the moment. What they're proposing, it's like I mean, as far as the argument goes, is it fair for people to possibly be breathing in trace amounts of cigarette smoke when they're in an outdoor space? Is it fair for me as a non-driver, as a non-motorist, to be breathing in the exhaust fumes of all of the cars that drive by every single day that I go out and use the pavement? Is that fair for me and potential detrimental health effects for me? Well, maybe it's not, but I'm not about to try and call for cars to be banned. I realise it's not quite the same thing. Cars are a mode of transport and pretty essential in our day-to-day lives, whereas cigarettes are a personal choice. But nonetheless, if we're talking about, adverse health effects from even things being released in outdoor areas. Let me read a few comments from you guys here. Let's see. I feel like Labour being in is a new manager, same as the old manager situation. Nothing will change. It's just a different colour of the same morons in charge. Average IQ of about 80. It's been so long since we last had a Labour government. For me, at least, I'm 30 years old, and I was 16. I was 16 when Labour left power the last time, and the Tories came in. So it's been a long time since seeing Labour in power for me. I certainly get the impression from what I remember at the time, not being happy with the new Labour government as they were, and probably wanting to see them gone. And being sick to the back teeth of them. Probably, I think things like MP's expenses scandal, the Iraq War, other stuff at the time, contributing to an anti-politician and probably anti-Labour specifically sentiment from me at the time. As I've said to you guys, I would have voted Lib Dem in 2010 had I been old enough to vote. But of course, I've also got to appreciate that I grew up. I grew up essentially never having seen a Tory government with my own eyes. Apart from a few years of John Major when I was an infant, which I don't remember, I grew up entirely under New Labour. So the bar I was setting all of my approval and disapproval against was very much what New Labour did during their time. Suddenly the Tories come in and I go, oh, Christ, these are the Tories that everyone had been warning me about. I see what they were saying now. Funnily enough, actually, yeah, that I would have voted Lib Dem in 2010, the year that we had a change of government, and I did vote Lib Dem in 2024, the year that we had a change of government. It just occurred to me the other day that feels like a weird little coincidence. Me as a person who hardly ever has actually voted Lib Dem in my life. Both elections that ended up being change of government elections, they were the ones that I did or would have voted for the Liberal Democrats. I suppose that it goes to prove a little bit that their purpose of being there as the not Labour, not Tory option has something to it, maybe. But anyway, I got sidetracked ever so slightly. You were saying, though, new manager, same as the old manager, nothing will change. It's just a different colour of the same morons in charge, etc. I think that depends what you're looking for from them. Really, it depends what your priorities are, what you want to see changed in the country, and whether you think that Labour are any different from the Tories in changing the things that you want to see changed. And I think depending on what those things are and what policy areas are, either you can argue, yes, there will be a reasonable amount of change, or no, it'll be the same as it was before, because there are areas where there's degrees of consensus between the two main parties. I expect things will be different, but I don't expect them to feel different particularly quickly. Liberty Prime says, if only we didn't let them tell us what to do in the pandemic. No smoking outside of pubs is akin to 6 people only outside drinking, no mixing in houses, allowing common. Well, I've seen polling. I've seen polling from YouGov on this proposed smoking ban outside pubs, and the public supports it. Much to my displeasure. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I want to say it's something along the lines of, 30% strongly support it, 20% slightly support it, 10 or 15% are largely indifferent. Another 10 or 15% oppose it. Another 10 or 15% slightly strongly oppose it. So something like that. Maybe breaking it down to 2/3 of support from the public, or over half of support from the public, or whatever. But I suppose for one thing, the vast majority of the public are not smokers, so it's probably easier to want to ban something if you're not the one being affected by the ban. But also, I think that just there seems to be a real mood amongst the public at large in this country where they do like banning things, and I don't like it. I do not like it. That it seems that they're calling out to say, yes, please restrict us, stop us from being able to do things. We want you to ban this and ban that, please. I just But I can stand behind and go, but it wasn't in the manifesto, was it? Wasn't in the manifesto. There we are. I don't care if the public maybe support it. It wasn't in the manifesto. They shouldn't be doing it. It affects me personally. I'm opposed to it. But then again, that's the thing. It's it doesn't need to be whether or not a majority of people support something or not. Whether I go, well, there we go. If more people are in favour of it, therefore it's automatically the right thing to do. What else have we got here? As expected, Starmer is running Britain as technocracy, where he believes he's divinely appointed. Lee Hallam says Lib Dems are for voters who want to say "not in my name," not taking responsibility. I can't even argue against you that strongly, Lee, to be honest, because I think in my heart of hearts, at least for me voting Lib Dem this year, I think you're right. I think it was me looking at it and I kind of safely went, yeah, look, I know the Tories are out of power. I obviously know that Labour are going to be in power instead of the Tories. If you ask me, would I prefer Labour over the Tories in power? I'm going to say yes. And therefore I, tacitly approve of what's going on. But because I know that Labour are going to end up inevitably doing some things that I'm not going to be happy with, I will vote Lib Dem and therefore rinse my hands of any responsibility. If I had voted Labour in the election right now, I'd be kicking myself because I'd be going, I vote Labour and look what they do. They ban me smoking outside the pubs. But instead I can go, but I voted for the Liberal Democrats, so I'm not to blame. Now, this is completely forgetting, I think, that, I don't know. Is this the sort of thing that the Lib Dems would do? On the face of it, when you think about them being Liberal Democrats, they really shouldn't be doing stuff like that. But I wonder when the votes come around whether they'll vote in favour of the ban or not. I'm sure they probably will. So that argument only goes so far, doesn't it? Liberty Prime says basic competency, balanced budgets, looking after our pensioners and less fortunate, enough housing, low inflation, accessible services, not really hard. Lee Hallam says Starmer's ideology is I don't like it, so I will prosecute you for doing it. I'm starting to see a lot of memes to that effect online in the past few days as well, which I am enjoying, to be fair. The idea that Starmer's going to come drone strike you if you light up a fag within a few meters of a building. Lee Hallam says it's why Lib Dem voters had a nervous breakdown when they got into power. Hey, I suppose you're right. And again, if I think about my own personal experience of it, would have voted Lib Dem in 2010 had I been able to, and then immediately would have come to regret it. Not least because I was heading into university age at the time, and God knows them going back on their tuition fees pledge. I think I probably hated Nick Clegg more than any political figure I could think of for at least a few years for his betrayal. So yeah, no, I very much see where you're coming from. I mean, in fairness to the Lib Dems and their voters, there are Lib Dem members, Lib Dem voters out there who do have, I think, more of a feeling of a coherent set of views and values of what the Lib Dems are there for, where they sit on the political spectrum, why it is that you want to vote Lib Dem. But then as far as the wider electorate voting for them goes, I think we're right in saying that, yeah, there is a fair protest vote element of them, a third party element of saying, well, look, it's not the Labour or Tories, so I'll vote for them. Lee Hallam says the old Liberals would have been in favour of liberty, not this lot, just social democracy and posh people. See, I love a bit of social democracy. I'm all about that social democracy, but I just don't. I don't want social democracy hand in hand with nanny state authoritarianism, really. And I'm not. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to bang drums by saying authoritarianism with a big capital A and trying to claim that it's some awful government that's going to put us in some 1984. Well, I suppose that'd be totalitarian rather than authoritarian. But my point being, it's authoritarian with a lowercase a. But nonetheless, I don't like, oh, we're going to come into power. Here, no more cigarettes for you. Haha. Yeah. I'm sure you're all absolutely shocked that of all the things I've talked about in this stream, this is the one that I've got the most, the most clear views on, and the most passionate subject that I could be getting on to talking about. But here we are. It's what affects me in my day-to-day life. It's like when Rishi Sunak, like last year or whenever it was, announced that they were going to extend the £2 bus tickets for another year. I was head over heels for that. It was an example of political announcements affecting me in my actual day-to-day life. I went, oh, fantastic! £2 bus tickets for another year, brilliant. This affects me. This is making my life easier, Leave all agree, says Liberty Prime. Leave everyone to do what they want. Party would win. Yeah, I mean, it's that guiding principle, and it's a phrase that's sort of done to death. But do what you want. Leave people to their own devices. Just don't hurt anyone. Let people do what they want to do as long as you're not hurting anyone. And then the argument against it in the situation of, say, the pub smoking is you go, but the secondhand smoke is hurting people, ever so slightly, possibly. But I think you need a cut off, don't you? You need a cut off of perceived harms where you go, okay, yes, potentially it could be harming people, but how many other things out there could be harming people that we could ban? Like I say, get all the cars off the street in that case. Force everyone to go ride bikes. I don't want to breathe in your bloody petrol. Anyway, folks, I've realised that I've come up to about an hour or so on streaming. I felt a little bit rusty today. I don't feel like I've been on top form, so I do apologise if that's the impression you guys have had as well. Happens sometimes when I've gone a little while without streaming, and I've got a lot of things that I want to tackle. But hopefully I've got some views out on some things that you find sort of semi-coherent. Is there anything that any of you want to ask me or hear me talk about before I go? I'll sort of throw it open to you guys if there's any other topics or questions. Liberty Prime says, I once knew a guy whose sister's dog got hit by a car. That could have been anyone. Ban all cars. So speaks Keir Starmer. Lee Hallam says, Starmer uses the save the NHS argument. We are all here to serve the NHS. And Frank says, great stream, Swiss. One last question. When is the regeneration going to be over? Oh, that's a fair question. We're coming up to a year or so since the alleged regeneration was supposed to happen, aren't we? I'll address that in a moment. I'll come back to it. Liebel says, you were rusty Swiss. I couldn't even rate you the obligatory solid 7 out of 10 for this stream. Oh well. Something is better than nothing, as they say. Yeah, in answer to your question, Frank, soon, I want to say. Like I say, it's been a funny year for me. That I was going to do all these grand plans with the channel, and they were massively derailed. Like during the immediate period of time, I was going to do it when my brother had an accident and was in hospital for a long time, and it just kind of dominated everything for me for a while. And then I think looking back, I don't think I've done a tremendous amount of content on YouTube this year, besides kind of a flurry of activity around the general election, because obviously general elections bring me back. But even in the past few days, I've been looking at all kinds of different stuff I want to do. I've been looking at AI generated content that I've been making. I've been looking at gaming let's plays again. This is going to be wild. I don't know what some of you'll think of this. I've even been looking at dipping my toe back into making music again. If you remember on the second channel, I used to occasionally do little songs or ditties or parodies or whatever. I've been looking at that a bit more seriously lately. But I seem to, honestly speaking, I seem to struggle with focus. Really, I've got all these ideas of things that I want to do. I really struggle with the focus. It seems that it's only in a blue moon in the right settings where I can really hyper focus into a particular project and see it through to the end. Otherwise, it feels like I'm trying to squeeze blood out of a stone or something, you know. Um, so I don't know. Sooner or later, something will budge, and some significant change will come to the channel. Whether that's me saying "screw it," I'm just gonna keep it as Captain Swiss and gradually bring back a bunch of the old content that I'd archived, or whether one day you suddenly go, "Oh, who's this YouTuber with a totally different name and icon and no videos on the channel, uploading completely different content to what they did before?" I can't tell you because those decisions haven't been made yet. I'm still thinking on it all. Um, Frank says, honestly, I think you should try out anything you want, Swiss. Just make sure you're passionate about doing it. Personally, I wouldn't think another Pokemon Nuzlocke would go amiss. Good luck either way. Thank you, Frank. Thank you. I appreciate hearing that. And I think, to be honest, it goes it goes hand in hand with just how I'm doing at the time that I'm thinking about making this content. I need to be in a good frame of mind, and so many things need to be right for me to really pour my energy into YouTube these days. It just feels quite different from how it was a few years ago for me. I think arguably because I'm a lot busier than I was a few years ago. I've got a hell of a lot more things occupying my time than back in about 2018, where I could do 2 streams a day chatting to you guys. But I appreciate that. I think the push coming to shove will eventually be I'm going to have to accept that if I really do genuinely want to branch out into a lot of different kinds of content and focus my attention in new directions, I need to accept that it's going to alienate a chunk of my audience that I've built up from doing near enough purely political content. And I don't think I can have my cake and eat it, really, can I? I think I need to accept that if I am going to make a drastic change to the overall type of output on the channel, then there is going to be bumps in the road with that. But maybe that's what it is. Maybe I've been putting off doing that. And I think maybe as well, I'll admit, I think there is a slight fear of failure as well. To suddenly change up what you're doing and put things out there, you want it to work, you want it to be well received, but you don't know if it will. But I'll get there with it. I will. I've been doing YouTube since I was about 13 years old. They're buried, deleted, fossilized YouTube channels from the past where I did all kinds of different content when I was younger. Lots of comedy skits, lots of video games, lots of all sorts of stuff with different names and monikers and everything. But obviously, you guys have all only known me as Captain Swiss from about 2017 onwards or so. But there was a lot of stuff. It's a good thing a lot of that stuff's gone, by the way, because a hell of a lot of it I would look at now and probably cringe myself into a small implosion. But hey ho. Lee Ball says, hey, I was jesting, Swiss. I like saying solid. Oh, I know. And Lee Ball says, hey, if I could appear on your election night stream without any issues, you can do almost anything, mate. Well, I appreciate that, Lee, as well. Thank you very much. Thank you. You know what? I'm going to say it right here and now. I'm going to make a real concerted effort to make September a productive month for this YouTube channel. Let's say that, okay? Let's say I'm going to try and put out at least 1 or 2 things a week, and I'm going to try and force myself into trying some new things as well. That's where I'm at right now. And we'll get to the end of September, and we'll see how it's gone, and then we'll take it from there. How about that, eh? Anyway, folks, I've got some things to do. I'm off the way on a little trip this weekend. I'm going to Scotland. Yeah, I knew I'd go back there again eventually. So I hope you guys have a nice weekend. I know that I will. I'll see you all again soon. Look after yourselves. Catch you later on. Oh, and one more thing, I suppose. Feel free in the comments below. Stick in a few suggestions, I guess. If there's any stuff that you go, you know what, Swiss, I'd really love to see you try this. I'd really love to see you put your hand at that. You know, what would it look like if you tried to do this kind of content or whatever? Any ideas or suggestions that you got? Feel free, because I think I'm in a state of kind of, you know, infinite possibility but zero direction at the moment. Lots and lots of ideas, no application, but we'll get there. We shall. See you later, guys.